Forbes Books presents Leading What Matters Most, the podcast that helps you change behaviors, improve performance, and unlock the potential of your people. Here's Phil Geldart.
Welcome back to my conversation with Chris Tompkins, the CEO of Muskoka Woods, which is a Christian youth organization right here in Ontario, Canada. We've been talking about the responsibilities of leadership and how he is using research to build relationships with emerging leaders of the future. Chris, can you tell me a bit more about your findings on how Gen Z see the world and therefore how we can be sensitive to them?
I think this next point is probably true for so many of us in life, but it was pretty glaring in the data around young people. They know what they believe is important, but they don't always and quite often spend their time accordingly. There was a massive discrepancy. We had some metrics, some questions, what rank these things and what's most important to you, and then how much time do you spend in a day on those things. And like probably many of us who think that exercise is really important but don't really do it, there was a big discrepancy. And Kouzes and Posner from the Leadership Challenge said, how you spend your time is the single best indicator of what's important to you. And so there is a massive gap between where Gen Z states what they think is important and where they spend their time. And where that comes into us, Phil, as business leaders or organizational leaders is around some specific things. So a clear thing from this study and other research on the subject is that this group of young people is not getting enough rest. It was so common that it was unremarkable, meaning they know that rest is important, but it was like not even happening at all. Young people need to understand the effects of that lack of sleep has on them, both immediately and over time. It is difficult to really understand how that affects us as individuals because they're subtle and often explained over other things in life. Your stress or anxiety is a little high today. You think it's because of the drive to work, but really it's at the end of the day, you haven't rested well enough. And so when we're tired, it's more difficult to exercise the necessary self-control to go to sleep. So what we were hearing from young people is, I know sleep's important, but when I finish the day, I just want to do something fun. I want to do something that helps me relax, whether that's Netflix or whatever. And what they're finding is that it just actually prolongs and delays the thing that they actually need the most to help them, which is good sleep. So I use that as a specific example of kind of the discrepancy between what they know is important and where they're spending their time. What young people want in a workplace is flexibility as far as hours and place, a place that provides mentoring and opportunities for success, is collaborative and cooperative, allows for autonomy, and has high trust between the community, outside the organization, within teams, and with management. And like I said before, they want to do work that really matters, work that they feel makes the work a better place. So that's what they want from the workplace. So flexible, mentoring opportunities for success, collaborative, cooperative, allows for autonomy, and has high levels of trust. They want leaders who are sensitive, intelligent, dedicated, charismatic, and competent. High skill was a very high level for them. And I think that goes back to the trust piece. They want leaders who lead by example and are willing to do the unpleasant work that they expect others to do. So that's a snapshot. I think another way to summarize it is they want leaders who facilitate community among the employees and the people that work together, that they communicate well and effectively to staff, that they respect the other staff and are organized and competent.
One thing that as you were chatting through what they want as an employee, as a youth, I think that's a lot of things that I as a leader have to pay attention to. And I was thinking, all right, now let's say I'm a leader and I've got a group of 20, only 5 of which are Gen Z, and the rest go all the way up to near retirement. So then they go, okay, so how do I manage that diverse population that makes up my small team? But when you articulate the things that that group want from their leader, it's the same thing everybody wants. The behaviors that they are looking for from their leader are the same things that a 50-year-old would want from their leader. So if you're a leader, it should give you, okay, I can breathe a bit of a sigh of relief. I don't have to be a chameleon here. I need to do the things that are right consistently. And perhaps the age group will value the things differently, but the things are not different.
Yeah. I think one of them in there, Phil, that I think is true for the 50-year-olds in our spirit, but may not have come out in a data point or what we've talked about that is probably more accentuated for young people, is around community, around friendship at work, relational development. And that goes back to the safety piece. And again, maybe because we were talking about interviewing camp people, we also interviewed university students, but the crux to the camp experience is community. These people live and eat and work together for a short period of time. And many of the people leave, and years later, Phil, still like their camp friends are the best man or maid of honor in their weddings, right? Like there's such a formative community there. And so maybe that's a bit more palpable, but I think like in this data set, but I think also that's true of my experience with a younger generation as well. There's much more a communal do this together feel, even though they want autonomy in their work. That's more to do with like, don't micromanage me, like trust. And that goes back to the trust piece. I want to be able to kind of co-create my work environment. We can't confuse autonomy with community. But that's a big thing that I wonder if is probably less. And as we get older, I think, we know it's important, but, we've got community in other spheres and parts of our life.
I think the word community is particularly relevant to that age group. I think an older age group would call it team or teamwork. I think teams have always been important. Now, it may occur perhaps after work when they go out together, but even at work, teams have always been a priority. I think that the concept of team is expanded in today's workforce because community includes more things than it used to, which then opens up a fascinating question, which you have less problem with. But for most listeners, how do you build that community and that sense of team in a virtual world where we're not at camp, we're not in the same dining hall, we're not in the same cabin? And it's even at Eagles Flight here, we're thinking, okay, we were a community in a big building and now we are a virtual company. So how do you build that sense of camaraderie and community? And we are working hard at that. But boy, you got to work at it because it's not as easy as when you're physically together. You rally around social causes or you rally around various things that are important, making time on the call to spend a few minutes and just socialize, but it's got to be intentional.
I think, Phil, what we've learned, we have a bunch of staff that are on site at the camp, but we had, closer to the city office that is kind of not there anymore. So we do have half of our staff are remote. And it is unique to think about what does community look like in a virtual space. One of the things that we tried to do is when we gather people and we're communicating things is try to have more things that bring us all together. Like we all care about these things. These are important to us. And I think as leaders, and communication's a big thing, when we're gathering together, we want to rapid fire through the things that we feel everyone needs to know. But sometimes if we're honest, it's only a fraction of the people that need to know that piece of information. But we're using this venue to be able to tick things off our list and communicate. But 2/3, half are listening to, our 10-minute speech as a leader. And we're like, yeah, this doesn't relate to me. And I think if we can do a better job of filling those times that we are together with the things that matter to everyone, then we will, in a virtual world, create more of that. Like we're all in this together. And so whether that's taking the opportunity to share stories of success that we can all celebrate, whether it's continuing to go back to the vision and the why, which we talked about before, or finding another alternative to give that message that's really only to 10% of the staff that need to know it. You don't use the collective gathering as a way to do that. Find offshoots and things to do outside of that.
So one of the things you and I chatted about before the podcast that I found fascinating was you were talking about the discrepancy in terms of what this group want and what they're actually willing to do to get what they want. So that on the one hand, yes, they really want to grow, but they're not really willing to put the work into it. And I found that was fascinating. So maybe elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, that discrepancy between what matters and where they spend their time, and back to some of these things that I think in our modern day world of attentiveness to mental health, there's this anxiety. It struck me, Phil, when I was looking at the data, this idea about worrying that they won't have a decent life because they feel that work is going to crowd out these other things that are of value to them. And so one of the things that we've been thinking about is how to continue to remind people of some of those values that they get while they're working, personal development, that communal relational side of things. It's easy for us to do this because we're a kids camp, but how do we make it fun? How do we bring in some things that invigorate and engage people so that work is less to do with like all this overwhelming task stuff that I need to do that can overwhelm me. So I think we think about some of those things like intangibles to the work environment that kind of dispel some of the, I get this at work, I just show up, I work really hard, and then the rest of my life is all this other stuff. And then we talked about it too, and I think it's having these realistic conversations about what is expected. And I do think, and I said it with the example about my daughter before, when you come in and you hear a young person saying, well, I want to move here in my career, but there's maybe a real or implicit resistance to working for that, like working hard or putting in the hours, or, like we've talked about, that's some of the understanding that I've had with some of the people is like, well, I'd love to get a leadership job or I'd love to move up, but, also can we talk about like loo time because I worked for like 20 minutes after, and so you get into those conversations and I think it's continually having conversations that come down to less about the tasks of what we're doing in our work and what they add up to, and having conversations about outcomes and broader perspectives of the accountabilities in your work and what it means to own something from start to finish. And like you said, I do think when we're worried about being overworked, some of it is young people don't know how to manage their time yet. I think our generation of parents have done so much for our kids and maybe over-functioned in their lives that some of the stuff they haven't figured out from themselves, packing our kids' school bags and making sure they're never late, because we will move everything, between here and the door to make it happen. And so we've done that. And then young people get to work and they're overwhelmed because they actually just don't know how to manage their time. So it may come across that, hey, I'm not prepared to do the work, but maybe it's like, I'm actually don't know what work's required to get here. And if they had a better understanding of how to manage their time, what accountability looks like, what start to finish of owning an outcome, can look like, how they put that, using Gantt charts and work plans and all that sort of stuff. What tools and technology can we provide for them to be? And young people, and it goes without saying, they're digital natives. And so any tool that's technology based to help them manage what might feel overwhelming in their work, they're going to embrace it and adopt it way faster than when we ever did. And so providing some of those things, having open conversations about outcomes, I do think that helps at the end of the day. But there is just this realization that young people are going to have to learn and find out what it takes to move ahead in their career. And we have to give them a taste of what it means to develop personally through stretching ourselves, taking on more, providing opportunities for career and vocational development, that they taste and see and go, okay, this isn't as much as I thought it would. It doesn't have to impact my life the way that I'm worried about before. And I can see how I can kind of start to integrate some of these things into my life and actually become more healthy and whole as an outcome of investing in some of these things that before might have seemed like, well, that's not really my job, or that's too much work.
Yeah, I would pick up on a word you used earlier, which I think is key, and that's expectations. I think expectations has got really two components. One, as you said, outcomes. Like these are the expectations because they don't know them. And often we make the assumption that, well, you're in the job and therefore you know what's required and I'll tell you what the outcome needs to be. But we don't lay out the expectations to get to the outcome. How to live within our culture, how to do it in a way that is safe, how to be respectful for other individuals, how to work within teams. So they go off to try to do the job, but they have no clarity on the path to get there. So they sort of stumble along. And I think the other is the expectations that should be on every individual to grow as an individual. If you are lacking in some skill or area, then close the gap. Now, you may ask me for how, and you may come to me for tools, but at the end of the day, you have to take responsibility for your own outcomes. I'm not going to spoon feed you into this. And I think some of those concepts, it's not that they're unwilling. They just, as you said, they just don't know. And that's true even at the most senior levels of an organization where they're trying to do major transformation. Okay, great, but I'm not exactly sure what I'm supposed to do differently to get that. And you have to help people say, okay, well, this is what to do differently. Then they have to choose whether to do it or not. But we can't make the assumption that willingness means competence.
Totally. There's one more thing I would just want to add for us listening. And, there was a line that came out in like the results as our researcher was kind of distilling some of this. They want leaders that are willing to do the unpleasant work that they expect others to do. That kind of leapt out. And what this to me is not, and there may be a lot of times where it doesn't make sense. It's not good stewardship of our time as leaders to get and do everything that is required of others in their work. But I do think it brings out to me something that is, with that statement and a few other things, is around what are we modeling as leaders to young people. I think so often part of their stress around overwork, Phil, is we might have a generation of people that don't have a healthy work-life balance and are modeling something on that end. So they see it and they're like, but I think modeling to me is not just something you do at a distance. What happens when you really get close and rub shoulders with this next generation as a leader? And obviously, wherever you are in your sphere of leadership, time is a precious commodity, but how we use it to bring others along with us and do things together. And I think so often there's a separation between those quote unquote at the top who are busy doing stuff over here and, a younger entry level Gen Z group of people. And so we always think about, like, honestly, Phil, the greatest lessons I ever learned in leadership was traveling around with our former CEO, John McCauley. Like, that's where I really got to understand. He didn't have to tell me this is what you do. I saw it because I was with him when he was doing it. And I think it dispels some of the myths about who these leaders are. It allows people that work with us to see us as real people. When you let people in some of the thinking and struggling and decision-making process, maybe not everything, but at least to some level, that to me is where modeling gets really real around coaching, discipling, spending time with that next generation. And I said it earlier about, asking good questions and listening. That stuff all takes time. And it's funny, all the good advice I've ever gotten from the people that talk to me on our podcast about parenting, every single thing I could probably do as a parent. It just takes more time, and I have to decide, is that time worth the investment? And I think when we look at this idea of modeling and doing things with others that are at, different stages in their career What does it look like to take on mentors? Because they did say they want mentors in that. The question we need to ask is that a wise investment? Not just for the future of our businesses, but even for our own development and growth, like you said, so that we don't just see and know red only. Like the only way we become purple is by absorbing and understanding some of that blue that, you talked about. But that does take time. It takes intentionality. It doesn't happen by accident. And it maybe takes us spotting a few of these young people that just with a little extra coaching, a little extra being with, may go a long way in the end.
I could not agree with you more. I learn by watching, and I grow by acquiring the skills of the folks that I admire, and if they take the time to show me how. It's one thing if I'm with somebody and I want to learn and grow, I saw what they did, but I don't know how. And then they got to pause and say, okay, you saw what I did there? Let me just show you how I did that. And do you have any questions? That's the true essence of mentoring, I think. Less about, yes, you can follow me around, but more, and I will commit the time to help you understand how you can do it yourself, which is, I think, what John did with you.
He did. And I can remember pulling our current summer camp director. One of the unique things about dealing with kids is you deal with their parents and when things go wrong. And part of my job when I was the summer camp director was dealing with some customer service recovery, and I would get the most significant ones. And so, yeah. And so, but what I decided to do is I would pull Paul, our current summer camp director, into the room and have the call on speakerphone so that he could hear it. He could see how I responded. Sometimes they would get tense and I'd need to pivot. And it's one thing for me to sit down and tell him what a conversation is like. It's another thing for him to actually experience it. And then we'd hang up and we'd debrief. And I'm like, what did you hear me do there? How would you approach it? And then we flipped it. And I had him do some calls while I was in the room. And then after we debriefed and I said, that was really good when you did that. You handled that well. When it got to this point, one approach you might want to take. And then now he's doing them all himself and I don't ever have to do them again. And so that's part of that, bring people along with you while you're doing work. Again, that creates community, that creates being known and seen and so many other things.
So Chris, let me ask you, as the CEO, what do you do to create a culture or an environment that allows the leaders that you're responsible for to begin to grow and model the skills which we're talking about here, to acquire the skills? How do you create a culture that encourages your leaders to get better at what they're doing?
It starts by seeing the people in our organization, not as commodities, but as human beings, as resources.
Yep.
And so because of that, we've made a decision in our organization to be very developmentally focused. One of our goals every year is around our people development. And so back to that, it starts by, and our top core value is called intentional growth. And so as an organization, we always want to be growing. If you're not growing, you're dying. And so we always want to be growing. And so number one, it starts with me. What am I doing to personally and professionally develop? What's my personal development bent? Then how do I bring into the organization a culture of people first? First things first is a thing that we brought in for our seasonal staff in the service profit chain. We want to take care of our people first. And so we want to address their concerns as seasonal staff come in. We want to make sure we're taking care of, are their lights working and do they have toothbrushes? Did they forget their pillow? Like all the simple things right up to, the day-to-day needs that they have. And because people are first, then I want to make sure our top value is intentional growth. And therefore we create a culture for development. So when we come together and we bring people together, whether that's at town halls, we have a huddle every week, it's called, and a town hall every quarter where we bring people together. We've instituted management training at all levels of the organization. And now we've opened up our management training to anyone. Like managers need to come, but anyone can see the topic and decide to show up because that's something. So we just did the decision-making model the other day in Barrie, And we actually had an Eagles flight facilitator come in and lead us through that. And so all our managers were there, but there was about 10 to 12 technical non-managers who wanted to come and be a part of that. And we have in our organization an emerging leaders program. We've taken across every department 10 staff that are under the age of 30, and we put them through an 18-month program where they have monthly leadership development opportunities with our former CEO, John McCauley, and myself and a few others. And they have kind of a program of reading, and all done out of our own leadership studio. So we've made a top priority in our organization about the development of people, not just because it makes us better, but that's also our way of investing in who they are. Because remember, I said our vision is to inspire youth to shape their world. Phil, I actually see that with our own staff too, is that whether people stay with us for 10 years or 10 months, if we can give them something to catch and taste that they take with them wherever they go, which is developing myself and investing in others is an important thing, then they will go make the world a better place, even if it's not being employed by us at the end of the day. And so we have a very high priority in our organization around people development.
That is probably more profound than it sounds. It sounds so simple, but the actual execution is not that easy. I interviewed someone a while ago, and a world leader in his company, literally. And I said, what's the most important thing for you? And one of the top things that he said was developing my people. I think to realize it is one thing, but to do it with the level of intentionality and focus that you do is quite another. But it then builds the climate that you need to allow your leaders to excel. So that's very perceptive. I admire a lot of what Muskoka does here and Muskoka Woods does and what you do there. So for the listeners here, I know you have your own podcast, Shaping Our World. Tell us a little bit about that and how we can track it down for ourselves.
Yeah, it's Shaping Our World. It's on all the spots where you can get podcast, Apple and Spotify and all those places. And at the end of the day, it was just I started having conversations about people going like, I don't understand kids today. It's a different world, and wanted to use our network at Muskoka Woods to start to bring some experts into the field to just help us unpack what's going on with kids today and what can we do to come alongside. We know that the next generation is going to shape the world to come. They're the future leaders. And so what can we do to shape our world and perspective by better understanding, and then help come alongside while we have the time. It focuses on parents, but it's mostly for people that care about youth and want to learn about what's going on in their lives and hear about how we can help shape the world through investing in our young people.
All right, Muskoka Woods, great place to send your kids.
Yeah.
Shaping Our World, great place to learn to be a parent. And thank you so much. It's good to have you at the helm there, Chris. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Phil. Appreciate the time.
And that will do it for this episode of Leading What Matters Most. If you've enjoyed the show, please take a moment to subscribe so you can get notifications when the new episodes drop. Also, if you could spare a minute, I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave a review to help others like yourself discover the show. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.
This has been Leading What Matters Most with Phil Geldart. If you want to create a culture that drives performance and develop leaders that inspire and motivate, go to philgeldart.com. Leading What Matters Most is a production of Forbes Books.